No one ever played with the billionaire's disabled son, until a poor girl wandered into their mansion, chasing her broken kite. In one unexpected moment, two worlds collided: her courage, his loneliness, and a father's guarded heart. What began as an accident would awaken love, loss, and redemption in ways no one saw coming. What happens next will move you to tears. The boy sat alone in the garden of gold and glass, counting the seconds between the sea's waves, until a barefoot girl with a paper kite stepped through the gates, and the wind remembered how to sing. Ethan Vale was 10 years old and already tired of being a ghost in his own home. From his wheelchair, he watched sunlight bend through the tall windows of the Vale estate. Everything around him was too perfect. Trimmed hedges, polished marble, the scent of sterilized flowers from an overpaid gardener. Even the ocean, glittering beyond the cliffs, seemed rehearsed. His tutors came and went like echoes. His nurses smiled too much. And his father, Alexander Vale, the billionaire with eyes the color of locked doors, was always somewhere else. When Alexander did appear, it was usually at Ethan's bedtime, standing by the door like a shadow unsure of what to say. He'd murmur, "Good night, champ," and retreat before silence could answer. Ethan had stopped replying months ago. Most mornings, the house felt like a museum built to display his absence. Down in the fishing town below the cliffs, life moved differently. Nets flapped on wooden posts, laughter tangled with the cries of gulls, and a girl named Lila Monroe balanced baskets of bread on her head as though she carried sunlight itself. She was 12, small for her age, all elbows and untamed curls. Her mother baked bread for the fishermen and sang while she worked, her voice carrying down the dusty streets. But Lila didn't sing much. Not since her father had left last year with a promise that dissolved in the tide. Still, she smiled. It was her armor and her rebellion. Every afternoon, after selling bread, Lila would sit by the edge of the harbor and fly her kite. It was nothing more than paper and sticks, patched in places with pages torn from old newspapers. Yet when it lifted into the sky, it looked like freedom pretending not to care who watched. From the hilltop, Ethan sometimes saw it through his window, a flicker of color dancing against the horizon. He didn't know her name, but the sight of that kite filled him with a strange ache, a wish he didn't have words for. On this particular afternoon, the wind carried her laughter farther than usual. Ethan tilted his head, catching the faint sound through the glass. For a heartbeat, it didn't feel like a mansion. It felt like the world might actually be alive outside his walls. "Sir." His caretaker, Mrs. Donnelly, appeared beside him, wiping her hands on a cloth. "Would you like your lunch in the garden today?" Ethan hesitated, eyes on the window. "No," he said quietly. "It's too windy." But he lied. He wanted the wind. He just didn't know how to belong in it anymore. For a long heartbeat, neither of them moved. The garden around them swayed, roses bending in the wind, fountains whispering. Ethan's fingers tightened on his chair's armrest, his pulse quick beneath pale skin. The girl broke the silence first. Hi." She glanced around as if expecting to be chased away. "I think my kite landed somewhere in your jungle." Ethan blinked. No one ever called his home anything so ordinary, much less a jungle. "You're not supposed to be here," he said automatically. His voice sounded softer than he meant it to. "I figured." Lila brushed dust from her knees, scanning the hedges. But the wind didn't ask permission. Her defiance was light, not rude, like a spark teasing dry wood. She spotted the kite tangled in a rosebush near him. Without waiting, she trotted forward and reached in, hissing when a thorn nicked her finger. Ethan's instinct snapped awake. "Stop! Those roses have thorns." She grinned, showing the small cut. "Guess I found one." He couldn't help it. A laugh escaped him, rusty but real. Lila freed the paper wings carefully. The kite was torn again, its tail fluttering weakly. She sighed, disappointed but not defeated. "It keeps breaking," she murmured. Ethan looked at it. "Maybe you shouldn't keep fixing it." She studied him then, the boy with ocean gray eyes and wheels instead of legs. Maybe that's why it still flies, she said. Because someone does keep fixing it. He turned away, caught between shame and curiosity. No one had spoken to him like that in years. Every visitor either pitied or ignored him. But this girl, she treated him like he was simply there. Lila crouched beside his chair. You want to help me launch it again? It'll only take a minute. I can't. Why not? Your hands work, don't they? He frowned. That's not the point. Sure it is. She handed him the spool of string. Hold this. Before he could argue, she ran to the edge of the lawn and lifted the kite. The paper flapped helplessly. Okay. Ready? I said I can't. On 3. 1, 2. Against every rule drilled into him, Ethan felt something reckless stir. 3, he whispered. She released the kite. The wind caught it at once, filling the torn paper like lungs drawing first breath. Ethan's hands jerked as the string tightened, pulling against his palms. He gasped, a small cry, half laughter, half awe. It's flying, Lila shouted. I can see that. She laughed so loudly the birds startled from the trees. The sound ricocheted off the mansion walls, echoing through halls that hadn't heard laughter in years. Ethan followed the kite's dance, the tension humming through the thread. For the first time in forever, he felt connected to something alive. Lila ran back, breathless, and crouched beside him again. You're pretty good at this, Sky King. Sky what? It suits you. You look like someone who belongs up there. He flushed. I can't even walk. Maybe, she said. But you still made the sky listen. For a moment neither spoke. The breeze cooled. Somewhere inside the mansion a bell chimed the hour. Then a voice shattered everything. Ethan! Alexander Vale's footsteps struck the stone path like gunfire. He strode into the garden, his tailored suit too sharp for sunlight. Behind him trailed Mrs. Donnelly, flustered and pale. What is going on here? His tone cut through the air. Lila scrambled up, clutching the kite. I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean. You're trespassing, Alexander snapped. How did you get past the gate? Ethan wheeled forward. Dad, she was just. She? Alexander turned to him, eyes narrowing. You know this girl? Ethan's throat went dry. No, I mean her kite. Enough. Alexander's gaze softened briefly on his son, then hardened again toward Lila. Leave. Now. Lila swallowed. It was just a kite, mister. I wasn't stealing anything. Leave. Her shoulders straightened. For a second, defiance flared again. But then she caught Ethan's pleading eyes and bit her lip. Without another word, she slipped through the hedge and vanished down the path. The silence that followed was worse than shouting. Alexander exhaled through his nose, forcing calm. Ethan, you know strangers aren't allowed on the grounds. She's not a stranger anymore, Ethan whispered. His father froze. What did you say? Nothing. Ethan turned his chair away. The string still trailed from his fingers, the kite a distant speck above the cliffs. Alexander watched the boy's trembling shoulders and, for the first time in years, realized he had no idea what his son truly wanted. Hours later, Ethan found the broken half of Lila's kite lying near the roses. He hid it beneath his blanket that night like a secret heartbeat. Down in town, Lila sat on the dock, knees pulled to her chest, staring at the dark mansion. I'm never going back there, she told herself. But the wind kept tugging at her hair, whispering otherwise. For 2 days the mansion stayed silent. The gardeners trimmed the roses, the maids moved through corridors like ghosts, and Ethan stared at the strip of sky outside his window, the broken half-kite hidden beneath his blanket. Each night he replayed that sound, Lila's laughter splintering the air like sunlight through glass. He'd thought he'd forgotten how laughter felt inside his chest. Now he couldn't stop missing it. Down by the harbor, the morning fog hugged the water as Lila and her mother unpacked loaves for the fishermen. Her mother's arm was wrapped in a sling. She'd fallen the night before, straining her wrist. You'll have to manage deliveries this week, her mother said with a tired smile. Lila nodded, hiding her worry. Every hill reminded her of the mansion, though she told herself she didn't care. She replayed Alexander's glare, the word trespasser echoing until it felt like a brand. That night she tried flying her patched-up kite again, but the wind refused to lift it. Maybe the sky remembered whose garden it had last touched. Back at the mansion, Mrs. Donnelly wheeled a breakfast tray toward Ethan. "You've barely eaten, dear. I'm not hungry. Would you like to go outside?" He shook his head. The window was enough. Later, when she left, he pulled the kite half from beneath his blanket. Its torn paper rustled softly, like the memory of laughter. He tried to fix it with tape, his fingers clumsy. The paper ripped further. Frustration burned behind his eyes. Stupid thing. He tossed it across the room. A knock. Mrs. Donnelly's voice. "Your father wants to see you in the study." Ethan didn't answer. He rolled over to the window instead and whispered, "Come back, kite girl." That afternoon, Alexander stood in his office overlooking the ocean, his phone pressed to his ear. "Yes, I'll sign it tomorrow. No, I can't meet tonight." He ended the call and rubbed his temples. For the first time in years, profit margins felt irrelevant. He looked toward the garden, where the boy once laughed. Maybe I was too harsh. The thought unsettled him. He called the housekeeper. "Find out who that girl was." "She's from the harbor, sir. Monroe family. The mother bakes for the docks." He nodded slowly. "Thank you." That night, while the mansion slept, Alexander opened a drawer containing a photograph. A toddler Ethan walking across a picnic blanket, his late wife's arms outstretched. Sunlight, laughter, motion, everything gone. He whispered, "I only wanted to keep you safe." 2 days later, the sky threatened rain when Lila made her deliveries up the hill. Her mother insisted she take the longer route to the market. It passed near the Vale estate. She told herself she wouldn't look, but when the iron gates appeared through the fog, her eyes betrayed her. The garden stretched wide and empty. She thought of the boy's eyes, the way he'd laughed. Sky King, she'd called him. Her fingers tightened on the basket handle. "Just one glance," she murmured. The gate was half open. A delivery truck had left moments ago. She peeked through the gap. No sign of him, only roses, bending in the wind. A voice startled her. "Looking for something?" She spun. Alexander Vale stood there, coat collar turned up against the drizzle. Lila's heart lurched. "No, sir. I was just passing by. I owe you an apology." Her mouth fell open. "For yelling. For forgetting what kindness looks like," he said simply. "You gave my son something I couldn't." She blinked, unsure how to answer. He nodded toward the path. "His nurse takes him to the terrace every morning. You could, if you'd like, return his kite." Her breath caught. "You kept it." He did. A small smile touched his lips. "He hasn't let go of it since." She hesitated, then stepped forward. "Only if you promise not to chase me off again." "Deal." That night, Ethan dreamed of kites and laughter and the smell of bread. For the first time in a long while, morning couldn't come soon enough. Rain arrived before dawn, soft at first, then steady as a heartbeat. The world smelled of wet roses and sea-salted air. Down at the harbor, the bakery roof leaked again. Lila's mother winced as she tried to knead dough with her bandaged wrist. "I'll manage," she insisted. "You need to rest," Lila said. "I can take the morning orders." A knock at the door interrupted them. A man in a dark coat stood outside, water beading on his sleeves. "Alexander Vale." Lila froze. "Mr. Vale." He nodded politely to her mother. "Mrs. Monroe, one of my construction crews accidentally dropped scaffolding near your stall yesterday. The company accepts full responsibility. I've arranged for your treatment at the hospital and a short-term position for your daughter until you recover. If you'll allow it." Her mother blinked. "At your mansion? Kitchen work, bookkeeping, whatever she's comfortable with. She'll be safe." Lila's eyes widened. "You mean back there?" Alexander's tone softened. "Ethan hasn't smiled in days." Her mother looked between them, saw something unspoken in both faces, and nodded. "Go on, Lila. Seems the wind wants you up that hill again. The mansion looked different in the rain. Less like a fortress, more like a home that had forgotten how. Inside, servants moved briskly, surprised by the small, soaked girl carrying bread and cautious hope. Mrs. Donnelly greeted her with a mixture of relief and curiosity. "Ah, you're the baker's girl. Come, I'll show you the pantry." Lila followed, glancing around the gleaming halls. Everything smelled of lemon polish and distance. When she finally saw Ethan in the sunroom, he was bent over a chessboard, moving pieces half-heartedly. His eyes lifted, and the color in them changed instantly. "You came back," she smiled. "Apparently your dad hired me. Don't get used to it." He laughed, startled by his own joy. "You still call him your dad?" "Well, he's not mine yet," she teased. "Where do you keep the flour?" The next morning he joined them for breakfast. Ethan looked startled. Lila smiled shyly. "I thought billionaires didn't eat with mortals," she said. Alexander chuckled, pouring juice. "On special occasions, we do." Ethan grinned, eyes bright. For a brief, golden moment, they were just three people sharing toast while rain tapped gently against the windows. But warmth always brings its own tension. Later that day, one of the estate supervisors whispered to Alexander, "Sir, the girl's been talking with staff. Word gets around. Some think she's, well, taking advantage." Alexander's jaw tightened. "She's 12. "Yes, sir. But perception." He waved the man off, irritation prickling. Yet the words lingered like static. That evening he found Lila in the greenhouse, watering roses. "Everything all right?" she asked, sensing his unease. He hesitated. "You don't have to stay long. When your mother's better." She straightened. "You think I'm here for money?" "No. I think people might misunderstand." Her eyes flashed. "Let them. I'm not here for them." Their gazes locked. A silent truce built on respect rather than apology. Behind them, Ethan watched from the doorway, fear flickering that the fragile peace might break. That night, Lila repaired the old kite again. She patched it carefully with bits of colored paper from Ethan's art set. When she showed it to him, he smiled through the lamplight. "It's prettier than before," he said. "Scars make things interesting." They flew it from the balcony, rain misting their faces. The kite danced over the sea like a promise rediscovered. For a long time neither spoke. The greenhouse creaked softly in the breeze. Finally Lila said, "You know, my dad left right after my little sister was born. Said he was going to find work inland. He wrote twice, then nothing. Mom says maybe he's ashamed to come back with empty hands." Ethan looked at her. "You think that's why he really left?" "I think some people run from the things they can't fix," she said quietly. "Maybe your dad's one of them too." He let the thought settle. "Maybe." Lila picked up a small pot of seedlings and set it in front of him. "Help me water these?" He frowned. "I might spill." So, it's your job. Maybe I'm letting you borrow it." He laughed, and something inside the greenhouse seemed to breathe again. Water dripped, the scent of earth rose, and for a while they simply worked in rhythm, her hands steady, his uncertain but learning. When Alexander walked in later, he stopped short at the sight. His son leaning forward, sleeves damp, smiling at nothing in particular. "Didn't mean to interrupt," Alexander said softly. Lila wiped her hands. "We're done anyway. The plants are happier now." Ethan looked at his father. "Did you know these orchids only bloom when they trust the light?" Alexander blinked. "That sounds poetic." "Lila told me." She grinned. "I might have made it up." For a fleeting instant, Alexander saw something he hadn't seen in years. The woman he'd lost reflected in the child's easy laughter. The sun he'd forgotten how to reach leaning toward it. Later that evening, Ethan found his father alone in the study, staring at the photograph of that long-ago picnic. The one with the running child frozen mid-stride. "You were there," Ethan said quietly. Alexander turned, startled. "You should be in bed. You were there when it happened. Why didn't you ever talk about it?" His father's shoulders slumped. "Because every time I tried, I heard the sound of you hitting the ground. Ethan waited. Alexander continued, voice low. I thought if I built enough walls, I could keep you safe. But maybe I only kept us apart. The boy wheeled closer. You can't fix everything, Dad. Alexander gave a thin smile. Your friend told you that? She's smarter than both of us. They both laughed, quiet but real. Outside, the wind rattled the glass again. Softly this time, like a knock asking permission to enter. Down in the kitchen later, Lila finished cleaning and found a folded piece of paper beside her tray. A sketch of a kite, drawn with shaky lines. Under it, Ethan had written, "Thanks for teaching me how to fly without moving." She pressed it to her chest, then slipped it into her pocket. Sunlight spilled over the cliffs again, washing the Vale estate in color. The last storm had rinsed away dust and silence together. For the first time in years, laughter echoed through the halls without feeling like an accident. In the kitchen, Lila balanced a tray of toast on one hand while Ethan steered his chair beside her. You'll crash into the door again, she warned. I won't, he said, then promptly caught the wheel on the corner. The toast slid, narrowly saved by Lila's quick hands. Told you, she said, giggling. Alexander appeared in the doorway, coffee in hand, trying and failing to look stern. Am I interrupting professional work? Ethan grinned. We're testing gravity. Still functioning, I see. Alexander set his cup down and began slicing fruit. Lila blinked. You cook. Trying to. He gave a wry smile. Turns out billionaires aren't born knowing how to make breakfast. She laughed, and something easy passed between them, like the start of forgiveness that didn't need words. That afternoon, Ethan convinced his father to join them outside. They took the wheelchair down the path toward the garden. Lila skipping ahead with a camera she'd borrowed from one of the staff. Smile, she called, snapping a picture of father and son beneath the rose archway. Alexander shielded his eyes from the light. I can't remember the last time anyone pointed a camera at us. Then today's a first, she said. Every story needs proof it happened. Ethan lifted the kite they'd fixed the night before. The paper, patched in colors, rippled in the breeze like a quilt made of second chances. Lila handed him the spool, and together they let it rise. Alexander watched as the string unwound between their hands. Small, ordinary, miraculous. Did you build this one? He asked. Together, Ethan said. We fixed it after the storm. Seems stronger now, Alexander murmured. Lila smiled. Things usually are. Evenings became their favorite hours. Alexander returned from the office early, sometimes bringing old board games. Other nights, he simply listened to Lila and Ethan invent wild stories about explorers, dragons, and paper cities in the sky. Once, after a particularly long tale, Alexander laughed so hard he had to wipe his eyes. The sound startled even him. Ethan leaned back, satisfied. Told you she's magic. Lila mock-bowed. Just honest imagination. Same thing, Alexander said. For a heartbeat, they all sat quietly, the firelight flickering across faces that finally looked like family again. Late one evening, Lila wandered through the music room and found a covered piano. She lifted the cloth, brushing dust away. You play? Ethan asked from the doorway. Mom taught me a little, she said, pressing a tentative key. The note rang out, clear and lonely. Haven't in a while. Play something, Alexander said, entering behind his son. She hesitated, then began a simple melody. Slow, careful. The same tune she hummed while baking. The room filled with it, a sound like rain meeting warmth. Ethan closed his eyes. Alexander's hand rested lightly on his shoulder. When the song ended, none of them spoke. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full. As weeks passed, the town began to whisper about the change at the mansion. The laughter that drifted down the hill, the girl who worked for the billionaire and somehow made him human again. Alexander ignored the gossip. He'd started measuring wealth differently now, in smiles, in shared breakfasts, in the quiet courage of a boy learning to live freely again. One afternoon he stood with Mrs. Donnelly by the window. Do you ever wonder? He said, "How a house can feel alive." She smiled knowingly. "Maybe it remembers when it's loved." That night, Lila packed fresh bread into a basket. "For your dad," she said. "He skips lunch too often." Ethan nodded solemnly. "He'll think it's a bribe." "Good. Then he'll eat it." They both laughed. Outside, the sky glowed coral and gold. The repaired kite rested near the window, waiting for morning wind. Ethan looked at it, then at her. "Do you ever wish you could keep moments still?" She thought for a moment. "No. If they stayed, we'd never get to miss them, and missing means they mattered." He nodded, understanding more than she knew. Later, Alexander found the two of them asleep by the fire. Ethan in his chair, Lila curled beside a blanket, the kite propped between them. He stood there quietly for a long time, the weight of years sliding off his shoulders. Then he whispered, "Thank you," though he wasn't sure who he meant. The girl, the boy, or whatever grace had brought them together. The sky that morning looked wash-thin, like it had forgotten how to hold color. Inside the mansion, the hush that usually meant peace felt different, waiting, listening. Lila hummed as she dusted the shelves in the music room. She had tucked the repaired kite behind the piano for safekeeping, the bright tail trailing like a ribbon of memory. Ethan was in the library, sketching. Alexander had left early for a meeting in town. Everything seemed ordinary, until the voices began. She heard them from the hallway, two staff members murmuring near the kitchen. "Heard the girl's mother owes rent. Mr. Vale's paying for everything now. Kindness never comes free in houses like this." The words sliced through her chest. She wanted to march in and defend herself, but pride pinned her feet. A moment later, Ethan rolled in, holding a folded paper. "You okay? You look like someone stole your kite again." Lila forced a smile. "Fine. What's that?" "A sketch. For you." He handed her the paper, a drawing of the three of them in the garden, the kite overhead, their faces almost right. "Dad says we might frame it." Her throat tightened. "It's perfect." But the whisper wouldn't leave her mind. Kindness never comes free. That afternoon, Alexander returned early, briefcase in hand, raincoat still damp. Mrs. Donnelly stopped him at the door. "Sir, there's been talk among the staff." "What kind of talk?" "About the girl. Some say she's taking advantage. Others that her mother's debts are being covered from the household fund." Alexander's jaw clenched. "Is any of that true?" "I don't know, sir. I thought you should hear it first." He nodded stiffly and headed toward the study. Through the window he saw Ethan and Lila in the garden, laughing as the kite trembled in the wind. For an instant he wanted to ignore every rumor, but fear, old and heavy, pressed down again. He opened the door. "Ethan, inside, please." The laughter vanished. Ethan blinked. "Why?" "I need a word with Lila." She looked puzzled but followed him to the terrace. The air smelled of salt and approaching rain. Alexander hesitated, searching for words that didn't sound like accusations. "There's been talk about your family. About money I didn't authorize." Lila stiffened. "We never asked you for anything." "I know, but perception matters. You understand how easily people already talk, sir," she said quietly. "They always will. But you don't have to believe them." He sighed. "I'm trying to protect my son." Her eyes glistened. Maybe protecting him shouldn't mean doubting everyone who cares about him. Before he could answer, she turned and walked away. In the garden, Ethan watched from his window, confusion twisting in his chest as he saw Lila's small figure vanish through the gates. The kite string hung loose from his hand. When Alexander entered the room a few minutes later, Ethan didn't look up. "What happened?" "Nothing that concerns you." "It concerns me if she's crying," Ethan said. His voice trembled. Alexander's patience frayed. "You don't understand, Ethan. I can't risk." "Risk what? Someone loving me?" The question hit harder than any accusation. Alexander opened his mouth, but no words came. Ethan wheeled backward, face pale. "You promised she could stay. I promised she'd be safe." "She was," Ethan said softly, "until you stopped trusting her." He left the room before tears could betray him. Rain arrived before nightfall. The staff whispered. The halls seemed to shrink. Alexander sat at his desk, staring at a sheet of paper he couldn't read. In the library, Ethan tore the kite from its hook and held it tightly, the paper crumpling under his fingers. She'll come back, he told himself. But the wind outside only howled, tearing at the shutters. When Mrs. Donnelly found him later, he was still by the window. Should I close it, dear? No, he whispered. Maybe she'll see the light. At the harbor, Lila pressed her face into her mother's shoulder, the smell of flour and smoke wrapping her like a blanket. You did the right thing, her mother murmured. Some places aren't meant to keep us. Lila shook her head. It felt like home. Her mother brushed a curl from her cheek. Then maybe you helped it remember how to be one. Outside, the wind tore across the water, scattering rain like handfuls of silver dust. That night, Ethan dreamed he was running again. The cliffs were high, the sea bright. He turned to see Lila chasing him, the kite above them, unbroken. Then the dream shattered, leaving only the rain. When he woke, the string was still wound around his wrist. Morning came slowly, gray and quiet, as if the world were holding its breath. Ethan hadn't slept. The rain had stopped, but puddles glimmered on the terrace, reflecting clouds that refused to break apart. He wheeled himself to the window and stared toward the town below. The road curved down to the harbor, where the sea met the rooftops like an old secret. He imagined Lila down there, baking bread, laughing with her sister, pretending she didn't miss the house on the hill. On his desk sat the crumpled kite. He smoothed it carefully, tape marks shining where the paper had torn. Then he picked up a marker and wrote one word across it. Come back. He wasn't sure who he meant the message for, her, his father, or himself. Down in the harbor, Lila wiped flour from her hands as her mother counted coins. Maybe I'll walk to the post office later, her mother said. See if that doctor sent the bill. Lila nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. She could still hear Ethan's voice in her head, small, brave, stubborn. You made the sky listen. She stepped outside. The air smelled of salt and damp rope. Her kite, now folded in the corner, fluttered as if nudged by an unseen wind. She frowned. The wind was still. At the mansion, Alexander walked the corridor outside Ethan's room. He'd spent half the night replaying his own words, each one landing heavier than the last. He stopped outside the door. Ethan? No answer. When he opened it, the boy wasn't inside. Panic flared. Then he saw the balcony doors ajar and the wheelchair marks leading to the garden path. Ethan was by the cliff edge, the repaired kite in his lap. He lifted his face to the wind. The ocean below roared softly, the sound less frightening now, more like an invitation. Alexander hurried toward him. Ethan, you'll catch cold. I needed air. He crouched beside the chair. I'm sorry. The words were quiet but real. Ethan didn't move. I thought I was protecting you, Alexander said. But I was protecting myself. From guilt, from losing you again. Ethan's fingers tightened on the kite string. You didn't lose me, Dad. You just stopped looking. Alexander swallowed hard. Then I'm looking now. They stayed like that, the wind combing through the silence until Alexander added, I need to find her, to make things right. Ethan finally turned toward him. Then take me with you. The car ride down the hill felt longer than it should have. Neither spoke much, though Ethan kept the kite clutched in his lap like a map back to sunlight. When they reached the harbor, the bakery's sign swung lazily in the breeze. Lila stood outside, a basket of bread cooling beside her. The moment she saw them, she froze. Alexander stepped out first. Miss Monroe. Her eyes narrowed warily. Sir. He took a breath. I owe you another apology and a thank you. You taught my son what years of doctors and tutors couldn't. She crossed her arms. I didn't teach him anything. He already had it, he just forgot. Ethan rolled forward, holding out the kite. I fixed it again. But it won't fly without you. Her expression softened, the fight draining from her shoulders. That's not true. He smiled faintly. It is. Alexander watched as she knelt beside Ethan and helped him unwind the string. The paper wings fluttered, testing the air. Ready? She asked. He nodded. On 3. They counted together, voices blending with the sea breeze. When she let go, the kite leapt skyward, sunlight catching the bright patches like stained glass. Alexander laughed. An unguarded, honest sound. It's beautiful. Lila turned to him. It always was. Later, they sat outside the bakery with steaming cups of cocoa. Ethan's chair squeaked slightly every time he shifted, but he didn't care. Lila's little sister peeked from the doorway, giggling at the sight of the billionaire eating sweet rolls from a paper plate. Alexander grinned. Best lunch I've had in a decade. Probably the cheapest, too, Lila teased. He laughed again, shaking his head. You're right, and somehow it tastes richer. For the first time, the space between them didn't feel like distance. It felt like understanding. That evening, before they drove back up the hill, Lila handed Ethan a small scrap of paper. For next time, she said. He unfolded it. A drawing of a new kite. Bigger, stronger, covered in colors. You'll help me build it? She nodded. If you promise to let me win at chess once. No promises. They both smiled. As the car pulled away, Lila waved until they were small against the horizon. The sky behind them glowed gold again, as if forgiveness itself had painted it. A month later, spring came early to the cliffs. The sea turned turquoise again, and gulls traced lazy circles above the mansion that no longer looked quite so lonely. Ethan sat in the garden with a notebook on his lap. His legs, still fragile, were braced by sunlight more than steel. He had begun physical therapy, not because he thought he would walk soon, but because he finally wanted to try. The pages of his notebook were filled with drawings. Kites, boats, people laughing. On the first page he had written, "Things that move even when they're still." Lila's voice floated from the gate. "You're supposed to rest, Sky King, not design a whole fleet of flying paper." He looked up, grinning. "You're late." She stepped through, carrying a wooden frame wrapped in cloth. "Maybe, but I brought something to make up for it." She unwrapped it. A new kite, built exactly from her drawing, but larger. Its paper a mosaic of bright, uneven colors. Alexander joined them on the path, sleeves rolled. No tie today. "So this is the famous project?" "Version 4, Ethan said proudly. "If it doesn't break the sound barrier, we've failed." They laughed, all 3. Together they carried the kite to the cliff. The wind tugged eagerly at the string. When Ethan gave the signal, Lila ran forward and released it. The kite caught, dipped once, then climbed higher and higher until it became a spark of light against the wide blue. Ethan let out a long breath. "It's flying." Alexander placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "So are you." For a while they simply watched. No words, no walls, just wind. Later, inside the mansion, the framed photograph that Lila had taken weeks earlier now hung in the hall. Father, son, and friend beneath the arch of roses. Visitors stopped to look, sensing something different in the house's air. Alexander turned the estate's unused ballroom into a community workshop, where kids from the harbor came on Saturdays to build kites and small inventions. Lila ran it with her mother. Ethan became the self-appointed chief tester, rolling along the terrace giving each creation its first flight. The sound of laughter, once foreign, now belonged here. One evening, as the sun lowered into the sea, Ethan and Alexander stood on the balcony. The wind smelled of bread from the harbor bakery below. "She'll be back up tomorrow," Alexander said. "I know." Ethan smiled. "It's Tuesday, kite day." That night, when the house grew quiet, Ethan opened his notebook and wrote one last line under his list. "Love is the wind you don't have to see to feel." He closed the book, placed it by the window, and listened as the waves and the wind argued softly over who loved the world more. Down in the town, Lila finished cleaning the bakery and stepped outside. She could see the faint lights of the mansion above, warm, steady, alive. She smiled and whispered to the wind, "Good night, Sky King. The wind carried it upward. And on the balcony of the house on the hill, a boy lifted his face toward the sound, smiled in his sleep, and dreamed of paper wings rising forever. Every bond leaves a thread between hearts, sometimes thin, sometimes unbreakable. Who in your life once held the other end of your string, and what did they teach you about love that lasts? Share it below. If you enjoyed this story, kindly do well to hit the like button and leave a comment down below. I want you to become a part of this family. Subscribe to this channel. There are more heartwarming stories awaiting you. Thank you for listening.